This week on To the Contrary.
First, former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg and women. Then, Boy Scouts, bankruptcy, and soaring cases of sexual assault. And women and retirement inequality.
Hello, I'm Bonnie Urbay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, Bloomberg's women problem.
Women's issues led the Democratic debate this week. Former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg's rise to second in the polls was challenged after Senator Elizabeth Warren and other Democrats grilled him about his past treatment of women. Warren quoted Bloomberg's insult-filled language against women who worked for him to compare him to another New York billionaire, President Trump. Warren said, quote, "I hope you've heard what his defense was. I've been nice to some women. That just doesn't cut it." Warren also pressed Bloomberg to release several women from non-disclosure agreements. Bloomberg said he would not do it since the agreements were signed voluntarily.
So, Congresswoman Norton, how do Mayor Bloomberg's women problems compare with those of President Trump?
Bonnie, Bloomberg's sexism was horrendous, but it was apparently all talk. Trump's sexism never stopped with talk, but goes on to sexual assault.
I think the public's going to say what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And if Elizabeth Warren continues in the primaries, he better find better answers than he had the other night.
Well, I mean, he certainly did not have good answers. And frankly, I don't know that we know that it's all talk because he won't release the women, mostly women, from these non-disclosure agreements, which he absolutely can do. And then the ones who want to talk can come forward and do that, and we can find out what's behind them. And I think that he's got to, if he wants to be the standard bearer for the Democratic Party, he's got to fix this.
Well, you can kind of consider them canceling each other out, so it may be less of an issue if he were to get the nomination. I still don't think that's going to happen, though.
Yeah, did this week's debate tank his presidential run, or? I mean,
if we've learned one anything, Bonnie, next week is a whole different ballgame than the one before.
The man has $60 billion. I don't think so.
Yeah,
well, he's worth 135, is what I saw this week.
He could spend a lot of money. And, you know, I think we kid ourselves as we think everybody in America watched that debate the other night or watched the news coverage of it. They did not. And a lot more will probably see his commercials. But he is going to have to answer those questions. And I will say one difference between, at least in this first debate that I saw between him and President Trump answering those same questions, is that Trump fought back. Whether you liked it or not or believed his answers, he did fight back. Bloomberg was kind of like, yeah, well, they didn't like some of my jokes or something like that. I was like, this is not a man who seems like ready to fight for the nomination.
But what is it? I must say, something is very wrong. Well, a lot of things are wrong with this political picture in this country, but Sanders and Bloomberg won't open, you know, Sanders on his medical record, Bloomberg on his medical record, and this thing with keeping the mouths shut of the women who he had to pay off. What is it with Democrats doing this? I mean, these are things that you would expect from President Trump after 4 years in office, but not a Democratic candidate for president.
Well, not one who wants to be the nominee of the party. You've got to release your medical records. These non-disclosure agreements the women have to be released from them. And Mayor Bloomberg needs to provide his taxes so that we can all look transparently at who he is. Yeah, we are not going to just buy the packaging of Mayor Bloomberg on television. We want to open up the package and see what's inside.
Trump has lowered the bar. Look, he hasn't released his taxes.
But does that mean every other president is now going to be able to get away with this? Or is the public going to respond in some way that says this is not okay?
Lowering the bar is a very bad thing, because once that precedent is set, it really does mean that somebody else has to be so good, or kind of Barack Obama is to raise it again. And if you look at the Democratic field, you don't even see that happening. That field better slim out pretty soon.
Can we just talk about NDAs for a minute? You know,
Non-disclosure
agreements. Thank you. I think there's this reflexive. We need to open them up, and every woman who we want to use as a voice to hit one candidate or another should be able to have their say. There is a reason why NDAs exist, and sometimes it is to protect the victims themselves. It's to prevent retaliation. It's so that a woman or a man who's a victim of sexual harassment or assault don't have to be held back because of something that happened in their past. So I'm I worry when I hear Elizabeth.
But wait a second. If you release non-disclosure agreements, it doesn't mean that the women will have to talk,
You're saying they
or
should
will
have
have
the
to. Yeah, they have the option to do it. So let's just be clear on that one point, that they don't. It doesn't say, okay, we're pushing you into.
No, but she's saying
you're becoming
she's
a
making
public
a very
figure.
important point. And you don't know what happened in that relationship. When you look at Weinstein and the way the women were cooperating, the point that
They
you
were
were
trying to
making
get
is the
work out of
option.
him.
Yeah, the point you were making, though, is the option. And I think everybody would agree that if she said, I don't care, I don't mind my stuff hanging out there, then let it all hang out.
Well, and I think we also, this kind of again goes and looks at what does the American public really care about? And I think sometimes we over-decide that, well, they really care about these issues. And I'm not saying they shouldn't. Everybody should care about the morality of people and so forth. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of people think people have done some things that weren't right, and that's their past, or hopefully it's their past. But I like them on X, Y, and Z, or I think they're going to be a good fighter for me, or they're going to stand up for me as president, whatever it happens to be. So I just, Elizabeth Warren used a lot of firepower in that debate, and I think it probably helped her the other night there. But we'll see how much the public cares about Bloomberg's past on this. I don't know.
No offense, but wait a minute. Isn't there a little more than just the public caring? I mean, when you don't release these things up front, they have a nasty way of biting you in the behind later on because they get leaked to the media.
Yep.
So shouldn't we be setting? I don't think the majority of the public pay enough attention to these details, so that should be our bar.
No,
I'm not saying they don't pay attention.
First of all, we can't afford the drip, drip, drip. And that's exactly what will happen. And this is about Mayor Bloomberg saying, I will not sue you if you decide that you want to come forward and talk about your experience. That's the decision that has to be made. And there's no good reason that he can't make that decision on behalf of himself and the company. There's no excuse for it. And frankly, I think the public may not care now, but they may care if they know what's
if they
behind
learn
some
a
of
big
those
bombshell that
agreements.
maybe is not there that we don't
I
know.
want to know before I cast my vote.
Well, but also, getting back to which do you think is more important to the American public? How healthy Mayor Bloomberg and Sanders are, or
what their taxes
what their
are,
tax returns are? What do you?
I mean,
think?
this has been an ongoing thing. Well, I think it always comes down to when people want to get somebody out, they want to go, we're demanding the tax stuff, or all these kind of things. But I question whether that's really, if the public cares as much about the taxes or even Bernie Sanders' health. I mean, look, he had a heart attack during
what
his
part
campaign,
of the
and he's still
public?
ranking number
Wait,
one.
But wait.
When you say I don't think the public cares, what
didn't say I
part
don't
of the
think they care.
public you said they don't care enough, and what part of the public are you talking about? Because
the people, I'm talking about the people voting, whether it's the Democratic primary, Republican primary.
how do you know
They may care where a candidate stands on issues more than they care about their tax returns. That's what I'm saying.
Well, and I also think that when you look at some of the polling, Real Clear Politics and also Emerson, all of those different polls, they dig down deep and ask questions like, what is the most important driving voting decision for you? In the Democratic primary, we are seeing its number one electability of President Trump, and then number two, issues. So if, for example, Bloomberg, if Democrats feel he's the best one to elect Trump, they may be willing to beat Trump, I'm sorry, then they may be willing to turn, they may not put as much emphasis on some of these other issues.
That is irrelevant, frankly. The standard for people who want to be president in the United States is that you release your medical records, you release your tax returns, and you come clean about your past. And I think that, you know, just because Donald Trump violated that standard does not mean that the Democratic Party needs to
But you
obey
see,
it.
that's what I meant. That's what I meant about the bar being lowered on everything. Right. And when the bar is being lowered on health or releasing of taxes, then everybody is held to a much lower bar. And that is what is happening to this whole set of candidates, Trump and the Democrats.
But unless you see a poll come out like where, you know, pollsters dig down and people say, I want to know what his income is. I want to know how much he paid in taxes. I want to know how much he gives to philanthropy. Your candidates are going to continue to get away with it,
well,
right?
But here's what I mean, and I'll give an example. I mean, look at, we now know what Bill Clinton was doing in office, right, with an intern, and people decided, you know what, we know that, and that's kind of bad, but we like his policies, and so they reelected him. So I just think you have to be very careful of saying the public, once they know this, it's all going to be out there. People, they take a look at it, but I think at the end of the day, they're like, what's that person going to do in terms of how it's going to impact my day-to-day life? And that's what they care about.
All right, let us know what you think and what you care about. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Urbay. From Democratic politics to scouting and sexual assault.
The Boy Scouts of America filed for bankruptcy amid thousands of sexual abuse allegations. After statutes of limitations on sex abuse cases were lengthened in states including California and New York, childhood victims of sex crimes have come forward. The LA Times published an internal Scouts record known as the, quote, perversion files, listing allegations made against troop leaders. Hundreds of instances surfaced where the Boy Scouts failed to report crimes or simply blacklisted troop leaders and kept the stories private. Since the 1940s, more than 7,000 abusers were reported, affecting some 12,000 targets of abuse. The allegations have caused membership to decline on a mass scale. Even after the decision to admit girls, the numbers have not been offset. The organization apologized to all survivors and announced a plan for mandatory screening of all potential troop leaders.
All right, Donna Edwards, former Congresswoman. We are, first the Catholic Church, then God knows who, now the Boy Scouts. I saw a documentary on the Mubi channel where it's all about the Hasidic Jews in Israel doing this to their, same thing to their boys. How long are we going to have to hear about these organizations? Many of them are so venerated by the public, abusing their children. Why can't they just all get it out there and let's move on and change their rules and get on with it?
Well, I think that's part of what is happening now. And I mean, I'm glad that these Boy Scouts, now young men and older men, have the opportunity to bring their cases forward. And I think this bankruptcy does allow for a restructuring that would enable settlements to be paid to those who were victimized. But all of these institutions need to come clean. Now, this doesn't impact, local councils and state councils because they're independent organizations. But they've got to clean their house too, and there has to be a transparency.
But they're going to be associated with it.
Exactly, and obviously it's impacting their membership. Look, all I can say is I was a Girl Scout, and we just don't do that stuff.
And my dad, who came from a poor immigrant family in Brooklyn, the only way he got out of there as a child was through the Boy Scouts. Wow. And it pains me to see this organization falling apart because of the stupidity and the pre-internet environment where you could just hide things. Now you can't hide anything anymore, and you may as well get it out there.
Now, well, I think it pains a lot of people, Bonnie, because I think you're right. And I think the vast majority of folks out there who've had experience with the Boy Scouts, it was a very good one and a very good thing in that young man's life. But, and that can be said for the Catholic Church and a lot of other organizations as well. But you have some very bad things that happened, and covering it up isn't going to make it go away or get better. And so I hope that this exposure, if you will, brings to light these stories, and these young folks who were traumatized get not payback. I mean, you never get over it just because you win a court settlement, but I hope they had their day.
I just read something about somebody discovering the Vatican secret files that go back to, just about the beginning of time, because the church goes back to 0, AD. But they have, are they going to have to, the Boy Scouts, they have that file that was discovered. They've outed people. They're moving on. Is the Vatican going to have to do the same to get beyond the Catholic priest scandal?
I would hope so, but the Vatican's it's a much more revered, much bigger organization, and
Well, it's revered. It's a church
and powerful. Certainly,
Right.
probably not as powerful as the centuries past, but I mean, I think it goes to a larger point about what happens when you try to hide things, the long-term impacts. Eventually, it comes out, and you mentioned this point earlier, Bonnie. It eventually comes out, and what happens to the organization, I think, it can be devastating. Boy Scouts filing bankruptcy is a good example of that. And so I hope there's a lesson to civil institutions as well as business institutions about the decisions that the people make at the top to hide what's going on and what it can happen to them.
We don't know about this because the Boy Scouts came clean. We know about this because the Boy Scouts went bankrupt. The bankruptcy opened this issue to the world. And why did they go bankrupt? It's related again to this sexism, worse than sexism, the way in which they dealt with sex. And I must say, I don't see any evidence that in any of these institutions, whether it's now the Boy Scouts, then the church, that without something horrendous happening, that you have the kind of leadership of these organizations which will say, let me come clean on this, without being prompted by a crisis like the Boy Scouts bankruptcy.
Well, what about like
also,
Wikipedia, for example? I mean, any major corporation who somebody hacks their personnel files and can pull this stuff out, can give it over to Wikipedia, and they'll publish it on a very powerful global platform. So we haven't seen the corporate institutions yet having their quote-unquote day in court in terms of what they're hiding from the public. Will we?
I don't know, but I mean, it does tell you the value of being able to extend statutes of limitations that allow these lawsuits to come forward. Because listen, the real reason that we know about this, whether it's the Catholic Church or Boy Scouts, is because some courageous people came forward and were able to bring their victimization to the public eye through suing these institutions. And I think that courage is actually, whether it's in corporate America or it's in these institutions, is what's going to enable us to get it all out there.
Yeah, and waffling around isn't going to get it done. I mean, just opening up the Boy Scouts to say now girls can be members and so forth, that isn't going to fix your problem. I mean, not even just financially, but from a PR perspective, that's not going to work. They've lost tons of other troops, like 400,000 troops I read that were related to the Mormon Church because some of the stands that the Boy Scouts now take. I mean, it's kind of like they're trying to be something to everybody. And then on top of it, you've got this huge scandal, which everybody thinks is bad and wrong.
Well,
and so they got real problems.
For those of us who believe in divine retribution here, was it divine retribution? I have to ask this question. Against the Boy Scouts for admitting Girl Scouts and taking at least some girls, away, if not a lot of girls, away from the Girl Scouts?
Well, the scripture that comes to my mind is what you sow is what you reap. I don't know if that's necessarily applicable, but I think the idea that you can just take girls in and they become scouts and all of your problems are solved, I think it has backfired and is backfiring.
And you, as a former Girl Scout.
Well, and the Girl Scouts membership is actually growing and thriving and elevating girls in a very unique and special way. And so I don't know that the sort of integration, if you will, around gender really has done anything to improve the prospects of the Boy Scouts. And frankly, there was a problem with Boy Scouts long before this scandal was exposed, and I think we're just seeing the ramifications of it.
And do you think things will come out about the Girl Scouts?
You know, I don't know. I don't think that any institution is immune to having bad actors within that institution and hiding it. And so I don't want to say, no to that, but I will say that to the extent that we know now, these are not the kind of things that have come out in Girl Scouting. who
But
knows
women,
what the
we've
future
seen
holds.
much smaller numbers, much smaller percentages, but we've seen women commit just about every kind of crime, including murder, that men commit.
Yeah.
From scouting to savings.
Only about 1 in 5 female workers worldwide and 1 in 4 in the U.S. says she's preparing for retirement properly. That, according to a new report, which also says disparity in retirement readiness between men and women is narrowing but slowly. The gender pay gap is considered the main culprit. Women earn only a fraction of what men earn, making it harder for them to save. But other factors exist. For one, women live longer, meaning they need more savings. Another reason is women are still expected to handle most domestic and child-rearing responsibilities and many of those costs. And women are more likely to take extended time off from work than men, usually to care for family. While these create substantial obstacles, women can take action. The report recommends women save early and regularly. They write down and stick to a savings plan and make a backup plan in case something goes wrong.
Genevieve, do you think women, in part at least in the U.S., are not preparing because they're relying on Social Security, which anyone who's been educated about economics is one of the three-legged stool you're supposed to have for retirement?
Let's get you out there telling everybody that and educating, because unfortunately many Americans, men and women, I mean, you look at study after study and they say the savings rate for retirement among all Americans is terrible. And I mean, but the problem for women, I think, is twofold. One is, especially in today's society where the divorce rate has increased, you're no longer married to somebody who you're going to rely on their Social Security and other things.
Well, and the non-marriage children before marriage
and the non-marriage
is way up.
That's right as well. And so then on top of that, until maybe a divorce happens, many times women are the caregivers, and so they haven't been out in the workforce building up their own nest egg. So I think men and women need to do better, absolutely, but women certainly have to look out for the fact they cannot rely, well, you can rely on it, but it's going to be a very tough retirement if all you have is Social Security.
And that's all that increasing numbers of women have. And I really don't see any way for them to get out of it, because if you start with their pay and you go through their entire financial lives, you really end up where women are today, over-relying on the government, on Medicare. That's why those of us in Congress fight so hard to keep that from being reduced. We're really fighting for the people who live the longest. That's women. And they're talking about reap what you sow. They sowed a lot and they're not reaping what they deserve.
I will say there's an opportunity here for flexibility. And increasingly, I think we're seeing the workforce create opportunities that are outside of the traditional 9-to-5 employee-employer type of relationship, where maybe you are doing freelance work, maybe you are driving for Uber. I actually have many moms who pick me up in the middle of the day because they're able to do their caregiving for their children or drop off aging parents at the doctor's office, because the market is suddenly providing these new freelance, independent contract type work opportunities that are really popular among women. And when you ask
they're
them
popular,
why,
but they're still not paying
it's
what people need to live on or anything close to it.
Well, that's not to say that you can't necessarily create a good living based on carving together, putting together different types of opportunities.
Yeah, but that doesn't really allow for saving, and I think you cannot have this conversation without talking about the significant wage gaps between men and women, owing to some of the things that you point out, but also the wages that women are paid when they are in the workforce do not allow enough opportunity to save in the kind of way that is going to protect them in their retirement, given that so many women are left on their own, whether it's by divorce or by being widowed or any number of other factors that leave women in the later stages of their lives on their own and unable to contribute to their own.
But I think all sides.
Congresswoman, nobody listens to me, of course. I have the best advice in the world. But the way for women to get out of poverty is to get their college degree first and have babies later.
Oh, the success sequence. Look at Bonnie.
As soon as you forsake your education because you have children too young or outside of wedlock.
Bonnie,
even if you're
more women get college degrees than men today.
okay, but still,
but
still,
and equally important, Bonnie, is that they get married and not have the children on their own too. But let's be clear, even if we all agree on the wage gap being the same
you
side,
can forget that.
well, currently
They don't, you know, if
But
they
I-
don't
but
listen
let's
to
even
what
just-
I'm saying, they're not going to listen to what you're saying.
Well,
Well,
let's
let me
deal with
throw something
reality.
out there that
women
maybe-
women aren't doing the things that you want them to do.
Well, and let's agree that
but they do.
we all have to save better. I mean, even if we all said, well, we agreed that there's this huge gap between women and men's pay, I will have that is a debate on another show. But a lot of men haven't saved for retirement either. So, I mean, this is also a matter of, yes, having the right setup in advance, going to college, getting a degree, but you also have to make the point of saving or it's not going to be there. And a lot of people, unfortunately, many Americans aren't making those choices.
And it's got to be personal savings too. I would not rely on Social Security. And my generation actually recognizes that we actually have higher savings rates than baby boomers right now.
But you're also having a lot harder real estate values are out of sight for young people, especially in big cities.
We have headwinds.
You have a
we
lot.
have headwinds, but I think we still recognize that if we want a secure future, we've got to do it.
All right, that's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter, visit our website, pbs.org/tothecontrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.
Funding for To the Contrary provided by the Cornell Douglas Foundation, committed to encouraging stewardship of the environment, land conservation, watershed protection, and eliminating harmful chemicals. Additional funding provided by the Wallace Genetic Foundation, the Colcom Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation. For a transcript or to see an online version of this episode of To the Contrary, please visit our PBS website at pbs.org/To the Contrary.
Be more. PBS.